After having highlighted the main idea sentences in our upfront read, we are now ready to engage with question one. And you can see we haven't even read the question stem for the first question of this passage until we do our upfront read. It is simply an assumed fact of the reading comprehension section that you're going to need to complete an upfront read to have a realistic shot at working through these rather dense passages. But we have our highlight tool still selected, and we read that we're being asked to find the primary purpose. And the primary purpose of the passage should be able to be gleaned from the highlighted sentences only. Now, if you had already watched the video of our upfront read, this is going to be a little redundant, but we're going to read the highlights only and have in mind what the content of those highlighted sentences is as we consider our answer choices for this first primary purpose question task. So we read the highlights. The technique of the sit-in was simple. African Americans occupying whites-only seats in racially segregated establishments, but this new type of student activism galvanized established civil rights organizations, brought about the creation of new ones, and generated support for the civil rights movement among many new segments of the populace. The sit-ins provided an important model for nonviolent protest and showed students they could affect the political process. The influence of these demonstrations on the determination of the student activists was particularly visible in two events: the formation of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the birth of a second form of sit-ins called freedom rides. But the development that marked the clearest turning point for the civil rights movement was the freedom rides. The freedom rides thus helped take the civil rights movement to a new level by underscoring to the U.S. government and to U.S. society generally the harsh realities of the segregation system, and by providing for students and their elders alike examples of the methods they might use to achieve a more equal society. Okay, so now that we've reacquainted ourselves with these highlighted main idea sentences, without reading any of the details that weren't highlighted, we should be able to address the answer choices, find one that matches what we had highlighted and just reread, while also highlighting specific reasons to eliminate as we encounter those as well. So with the highlight tool still selected, we look at choice A. Describe how the successful use in the early 1960s of a new tactic to combat discriminatory social practices led to the transformation of the U.S. civil rights movement. It can be kind of hard to pick A right off the top, but the new tactic is definitely the sit-ins and the freedom rides. And we know that it did, according to this author, lead to the transformation of the U.S. civil rights movement. It, again, might be a little bit difficult to just say this is definitely right, but there's nothing to eliminate for here. So we'll keep A open and we'll scroll on down to B, C, and D. So B states, chronicle the activities of the United States civil rights movement during the late 1950s and early 1960s that led to the first use by student activists of sit-in demonstrations. Well, it's not the first use, that's the freedom rides. The freedom rides were later. So first use is a background detail, and we can eliminate choice B hopefully almost immediately for that reason. Now, scrolling down a little bit more to frame up the remaining answer choices, choice C states, contrast various techniques and tactics used by the U.S. civil rights organizations in the early 1960s to expose the injustice of racial segregation and achieve a more equal society. Well, we don't contrast various techniques and tactics. We're really only talking about one tactic, the sit-in, and then how that played into a couple of further evolutions of the civil rights movement. So we can eliminate choice C for that highlighted piece. Then choice D, argue that confrontational sit-in tactics were necessary in order for the U.S. civil rights movement to make inroads against racial discrimination in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Well, we didn't state from the author that the sit-in tactics were absolutely necessary. They were certainly helpful. There's not really an argument about these sit-in tactics being necessary. And furthermore, it really kind of leaves out that whole thing about the freedom rides that we had at the end of the passage. So for a couple of reasons, we should be able to eliminate choice D. Next, choice E, provide information on the extent to which the activities of the U.S. civil rights movement in the 1950s and 1960s were rooted in the earlier successes of the movement. Well, we're not concerned with the earlier successes, we're concerned with the freedom rides. So we can eliminate choice E for that reason. And we scroll back up and hopefully can select A confidently now that we've evaluated all of the choices.